The gunshot echoed through the canyon like thunder, sending a flock of startled birds into the crimson sunset sky as Zara Everett ran for her life. Her calico skirt caught on a bramble as she fled, tearing the fabric her mother had so lovingly sewn just months before her passing. The year was 1876, and the New Mexico territory was as unforgiving as the man pursuing her husband of barely 8 months, Thaddeus Garrett. "You can't run forever, Zara." His drunken voice bounced off the canyon walls as she ducked behind a large boulder, her breath coming in ragged gasps. 5 months ago, she'd believed Thaddeus when he said he'd never raise a hand to her again after that first slap. 3 months ago, she believed him when he swore the bruises on her arms were the last she'd ever bear. Tonight, when she'd seen that wild look in his eyes as he loaded his revolver, she knew she couldn't believe him anymore. The sound of hoofbeats approaching sent her heart racing. She pressed herself against the rough stone, praying for invisibility as tears streamed down her dirt-smudged face. But the rider passed her hiding place without slowing, and the hoofbeats faded into the distance. It wasn't Thaddeus. Relief flooded through her, followed quickly by despair. She was alone, miles from town, with night falling fast. Gathering her courage, Zara made her way down the canyon path toward Silver Ridge, the nearest settlement. Her fingers traced the locket around her neck, the only possession she had left besides the clothes on her back and the meager savings sewn into her petticoat. Inside the locket was a tiny photograph of her parents, both long gone now. They would have never approved of Thaddeus, but she'd been desperate and alone after the influenza took them both in '74. The first drops of rain began to fall as the settlement came into view, its scattered lights promising sanctuary. Zara quickened her pace, ignoring the sharp pain in her ankle where she'd twisted it during her escape. She needed shelter, but more than that, she needed a plan. Thaddeus wouldn't stop looking for her. Men like him considered wives property, not people. The main street of Silver Ridge was mostly empty as the rain began to fall harder. The saloon glowed with warmth and raucous laughter, but Zara hurried past it. A respectable woman, especially one on the run, couldn't risk entering such an establishment. Instead, she made her way to the small boarding house at the edge of town. Mrs. Holloway, the boarding house proprietor, answered the door with a scowl that softened when she saw Zara's bedraggled state. "Land's sakes, child, you look like you've been dragged behind a stagecoach. Come in, come in." The older woman ushered Zara into the warm foyer, clucking her tongue at the sight of her torn dress and muddied hems. "Whatever's happened to you, miss?" "I need a room," Zara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just for tonight. I can pay." She reached into her petticoat for one of her precious coins. Mrs. Holloway waved away the money. "Put that away for now. Let's get you dry first, then we'll talk business." An hour later, Zara sat wrapped in a borrowed robe near the kitchen stove, her wet clothes hanging nearby to dry. A bowl of stew sat half-eaten on the table before her as Mrs. Holloway busied herself with tidying up. "Now then," the older woman said, sitting down across from Zara. "I don't need to know your troubles, but I can see well enough you're running from something or someone. Silver Ridge isn't big enough to hide in for long." Zara's hands trembled around her teacup. "I'll be moving on tomorrow. Heading west, maybe to California." Mrs. Holloway's eyes softened. "That's a long journey for a woman alone. The Dixon wagon train leaves tomorrow for Santa Fe. From there, you could join another heading to California. Mr. Dixon's a good Christian man. He wouldn't turn away someone in need." Hope flickered in Zara's chest for the first time that day. "Do you think he would take me on? I don't have much money, but I can cook and sew. Those are valuable skills on the trail." Mrs. Holloway nodded. "Get some rest tonight. I'll introduce you to Mr. Dixon in the morning." Sleep came fitfully that night, despite the comfortable bed. Zara's dreams were filled with Thaddeus's angry face and the sound of his revolver being cocked. She woke before dawn, startled by a noise that turned out to be nothing more than the wind against the window pane. After a simple breakfast, Mrs. Holloway walked Zara to the edge of town, where 5 wagons were preparing to depart. Men secured loads while women organized supplies and children ran about in excited circles. It was a picture of frontier life that Zara had once dreamed about, families making their way together, building new lives in new places. "Mr. Dixon," Mrs. Holloway called to a tall, bearded man checking the wheels of the lead wagon. "I've brought someone who needs passage to Santa Fe." Harold Dixon straightened, his weathered face curious as he took in Zara's appearance. She'd mended her dress as best she could, but it still bore the evidence of her flight through the canyon. "Mrs. Holloway vouches for you?" he asked directly. "She does," the boarding house keeper answered before Zara could speak. "Miss Everett is a hard worker, good with cooking and sewing. She'll earn her keep." Dixon nodded slowly. "We've got room. Mrs. Peterson could use help with the cooking, and we lost our seamstress to marriage in Albuquerque last month." He gestured to the second wagon. "You can ride with the Peterson family. We leave in 30 minutes. Relief washed over Zara. "Thank you, Mr. Dixon. You won't regret it." As she gathered her few belongings from the boarding house, Zara felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement. She was leaving everything behind, but perhaps for the first time, she was choosing her own path rather than having it dictated by circumstance or by a man's demands. The wagon train departed Silveridge just as the town was properly waking up. Zara sat beside Mrs. Peterson, a kindly woman with 3 young children, watching the settlement grow smaller behind them. Somewhere in those buildings, the telegraph operator would soon be receiving a message about a missing wife. Thaddeus had connections throughout the territory. His family had raised cattle in New Mexico for generations. He wouldn't give up easily. "First time on the trail?" Mrs. Peterson asked, interrupting Zara's thoughts. "Yes," Zara admitted. "I've never been far from home before." "It gets easier," the woman said with a smile. "The first week is the hardest. After that, the wagon becomes home." The days that followed proved Mrs. Peterson right. Zara's hands blistered from cooking over open fires and washing clothes in cold streams, but there was satisfaction in the work that she hadn't felt in months. The wagon train moved slowly but steadily, covering 15 to 20 miles on good days, far less when the terrain or weather challenged them. On the 5th day, disaster struck. The axle on the Peterson wagon cracked while crossing a shallow river, sending the vehicle lurching dangerously to one side. Mr. Peterson managed to guide the team to the bank before the wagon tipped completely, but the damage was severe. "We'll need to make repairs here," Mr. Dixon announced after inspecting the wagon. "Everyone may camp. We'll be staying at least one night." As the wagons formed their protective circle for the night, Zara helped Mrs. Peterson salvage what she could from their tilting wagon. Most of their possessions were intact, though thoroughly jumbled. The children treated it as a grand adventure, splashing in the shallows of the river while their father and the other men assessed the damage. "I can't salvage it," Mr. Peterson declared grimly as the sun began to set. "We'll need a new axle." "There's a ranch about 5 miles north," one of the scouts offered. "They might have what we need, or at least the tools to fashion something." Mr. Dixon nodded. "We'll send riders at first light." That night around the campfire, spirits remained high despite the setback. Someone produced a fiddle, and soon music filled the air. Children danced while adults clapped along, momentarily forgetting the dangers and difficulties of the trail. Zara found herself smiling genuinely for the first time in months. Here, among these people who asked no questions about her past, she could almost imagine a future without fear. She was learning to live day by day, hour by hour, rather than constantly looking over her shoulder. Dawn broke clear and cold the next morning. Mr. Dixon selected 2 men to ride to the ranch, Mr. Peterson and a young man named Samuel, who served as one of their scouts. The rest of the company set about making the camp more comfortable for an extended stay. Zara was hanging laundry to dry when the riders returned shortly after noon, but there were 3 horses instead of 2. Her heart skipped a beat as she took in the third rider, a tall man with broad shoulders and a dark hat pulled low over his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Dixon called, gathering everyone around. "This is Mr. Zachary Caldwell. He owns the Circle C ranch north of here and has kindly offered to help with our repairs." Zara studied the newcomer cautiously as he dismounted. He moved with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own skin, nothing like Thaddeus's nervous energy. His face, partially shaded by his hat brim, showed a strong jaw dusted with stubble and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Mr. Caldwell has offered us not only materials for the repair, but the use of his smithy," Dixon continued. "Peterson and I will go back with him to work on the new axle. My ranch hands, and I can help get your wagon there," Caldwell said, his voice deep and steady. "No sense trying to fix it here when we have proper tools 5 miles away." The next few hours were a flurry of activity as Caldwell's ranch hands, 6 strong men who appeared as if summoned by magic, helped unload the Peterson wagon and prepare it for transport to the ranch. Zara worked alongside Mrs. Peterson, carefully packing their essential belongings for the journey. "Mr. Caldwell seems like a good man," Mrs. Peterson commented as they worked. "Not many ranchers would go out of their way like this for strangers." Zara nodded noncommittally, her wariness of men, especially powerful ones, still strong. But she couldn't deny the efficiency with which Caldwell organized the effort, nor the respectful way he spoke to everyone, regardless of station or gender. By mid-afternoon, the Peterson family, along with Zara and several of the men, were making their way to the Circle C ranch. The empty wagon creaked ominously as it was pulled by Caldwell's team, but it held together for the journey. The ranch came into view just as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, a sprawling main house of timber and stone, surrounded by several outbuildings and corrals filled with horses. It was larger and more established than Zara had expected, speaking to Caldwell's success in a difficult country. "You're welcome to use the main house," Caldwell told Mrs. Peterson as they approached. "There's plenty of room for you and the children, and your companion as well." His eyes flickered briefly to Zara, who felt a flush creep up her neck at his direct gaze. "That's very kind," Mrs. Peterson replied. "Miss Everett and I are most grateful." Caldwell's housekeeper, a Mexican woman named Rosa who carried herself with quiet dignity, showed them to their rooms, simple but comfortable spaces with real beds and privacy that the wagon train hadn't afforded. Zara's room had a small window that overlooked the eastern range, framing the mountains in the distance. "Dinner will be ready at 6, Rosa informed them. "Mr. Caldwell takes his meals in the dining room and extends his invitation to you all." When Zara joined the others for dinner, she was surprised by the civilized setting. The long oak table was set with actual china plates and proper silverware, luxuries she hadn't seen since leaving her parents' home. Caldwell sat at the head of the table, his trail clothes exchanged for a clean shirt and vest, though he remained unmistakably a working rancher rather than an Eastern gentleman playing at frontier life. "Miss Everett," he acknowledged her with a nod as she took her seat. "I hope your accommodations are satisfactory." "Very much so," she replied softly. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Caldwell." As the meal progressed, a hearty affair of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread that put the wagon train's fare to shame, Zara found herself studying their host. Unlike most men of property she'd encountered, Caldwell listened more than he spoke, paying particular attention when others talked. He answered direct questions about his ranch, but volunteered little about himself. The work on the wagon began early the next morning. Zara offered to help Rosa with household duties, grateful for the familiar routine of domestic work. As they prepared breakfast together, Rosa proved to be surprisingly forthcoming about her employer. "Mr. Caldwell, he came here 10 years ago with nothing but a horse and determination," she told Zara as they kneaded dough for biscuits. "Built everything you see. Never takes more than his fair share from the land or from people." "He's not married?" Zara asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. Rosa's knowing smile suggested she understood the source of Zara's curiosity. "No, señorita. There was someone once, in Texas, but that was many years ago. Now he puts all his passion into this ranch." Throughout the day, Zara caught glimpses of Caldwell working alongside Mr. Peterson and Dixon in the smithy, his sleeves rolled up to expose forearms corded with muscle, his face intent on the task at hand. There was something compelling about a man who wasn't afraid of honest work, who didn't consider it beneath his station to labor alongside those he was helping. That evening, as Zara helped serve dinner, catastrophe struck. She was carrying a stack of plates to the table when her foot caught on the edge of the rug. She stumbled forward, unable to catch herself, and the plates crashed to the floor, shattering into countless pieces. The sound was deafening in the quiet dining room. Zara froze, her body instinctively tensing as memories flooded back Thaddeus's rage when she'd broken one of his mother's teacups, the bruises that had followed, his accusations of her worthlessness. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, dropping to her knees to gather the broken pieces with trembling hands. "I'll clean it up right away. I'll replace them." I'm so sorry. Tears welled in her eyes as she frantically collected the shards, not noticing when one sliced into her finger. Suddenly, a strong hand gently covered hers, stopping her frantic movements. Zara looked up to find Caldwell kneeling beside her, his gray eyes filled with concern rather than anger. "Leave them," he said softly, his voice rumbling low enough that only she could hear. "You're not cleaning hurt anymore." The words, so simple yet so perceptive, broke something inside her. The tears she'd been holding back spilled over as Caldwell carefully opened her clenched hand to reveal the cut on her finger, a bright bead of blood forming on her pale skin. "Rosa," he called without taking his eyes from Zara's face. "Would you fetch the medical kit? And perhaps take Mrs. Peterson and the children to the library for some after-dinner reading?" The room cleared quickly as Rosa ushered everyone out with surprising efficiency. Soon, only Zara and Caldwell remained among the broken china. "You've been hurt before," he said. It wasn't a question. Zara couldn't speak, could only nod as he gently dabbed at the cut on her finger with his handkerchief. "Not just here," he continued, his eyes holding hers. "Someone taught you to fear breaking things, to fear making mistakes." "My husband," Zara whispered, the admission painful but somehow necessary. "Former husband. I left him." Caldwell nodded, no judgment in his expression. "You were right to leave." Rosa returned with a small tin of medical supplies. Caldwell thanked her and asked for privacy, which the housekeeper granted with a knowing nod. With practiced hands, he cleaned and bandaged Zara's cut. "These plates," he said when he'd finished, "they're just objects, easily replaced. People aren't so easily mended when they're broken." His eyes held hers for a long moment. "Whatever he did to you, it wasn't your fault." Those words simple, direct, and so contrary to everything Thaddeus had beaten into her unlocked something in Zara's chest. The story poured out of her, her parents' deaths, her desperate marriage to Thaddeus who had seemed so charming at first, the gradual escalation of his cruelty, and finally her escape when she realized he intended to kill her rather than allow her to leave. Caldwell listened without interruption, his face growing more somber with each revelation. When she finally fell silent, he rose and offered his hand to help her up. "You're safe here," he said simply, "for as long as you need." The next morning, Dixon brought news that the wagon repairs would take longer than expected, at least 3 more days. Zara felt a complex mixture of relief and anxiety at the delay. Relief to remain in the safety of the Circle C ranch a while longer, anxiety about what would happen when they left. Throughout the day, Caldwell maintained a respectful distance, but Zara often felt his eyes on her as she went about helping Rosa. There was something comforting in his watchful presence, so different from Thaddeus's controlling gaze. When their paths crossed, he treated her with a gentle courtesy that neither presumed too much nor offered too little. That evening after dinner served on wooden plates that made Zara smile, despite herself, Caldwell invited her to join him on the front porch. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet, the air carrying the sweet scent of sage and pinyon. "My father built the first cabin here in '53, Caldwell said as they sat in companionable silence. "Just a one-room shelter with a dirt floor. My mother hated it at first. She'd grown up in St. Louis with proper floors and glass windows." "What changed her mind?" Zara asked, drawn into the story. A smile touched his lips, visible in the lantern light. "The sunset. Pa built the cabin facing west, so she could watch the sun go down behind those mountains every evening. She said God painted the sky differently here than anywhere else on earth." "They sound like good people." They were. His voice carried old grief, tempered by time. "Yellow fever took them both in '65, just after I returned from the war. I was 22, suddenly alone with a struggling ranch and no idea how to make it work." Zara studied his profile, strong and steady in the gentle light. "But you did make it work. One day at a time," he agreed. "That's all any of us can do." They fell into conversation easily after that, speaking of books they'd read, places they'd seen or hoped to see, dreams they'd harbored. Caldwell made no reference to her confession of the previous evening, yet his understanding of it underlay every gentle word, every respectful pause to let her speak. As the night grew cooler, he draped his jacket around her shoulders without presumption. The weight of it was comforting, the lingering scent of leather and pine subtly masculine. "What will you do in California?" he asked as the hour grew late. Zara considered the question, realizing she had no real answer. "Start over, I suppose. Find work as a seamstress or cook. Make a life that's mine alone." "A worthy ambition," he said softly, "but a lonely one, perhaps." "Lonely is safer than what I left behind," she replied, though the words lacked conviction even to her own ears. Caldwell turned to face her fully, his expression serious in the lamplight. "Not all men are like your husband, Zara. Some of us understand that strength isn't about power over others." The use of her given name should have felt presumptuous, but instead, it sounded right on his lips like a key fitting a lock that had long been jammed. "I know that," she said softly. "In my mind, I know it. But my heart needs more convincing." He nodded, accepting her answer without pushing further. Time has a way of healing, if we let it. And sometimes, the right company speeds the process. The next day brought a surprise visitor to the ranch, the sheriff from Silver Ridge, a gruff man named Harland who arrived just before noon. Zara was hanging laundry in the side yard when she heard his horse approach, and she ducked behind a sheet, her heart pounding. "Looking for a woman," she heard the sheriff say to one of the ranch hands. "Runaway wife. Husband's real concerned about her safety." Zara pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle her gasp. Thaddeus had put out word, just as she'd feared. She considered running, but knew she'd never make it to the hills before being seen. "Sheriff Harland." Caldwell's voice carried across the yard. "What brings you all this way?" "Got a situation, Caldwell. Man named Garrett's looking for his wife, says she's unstable, might harm herself. Described her as a small thing, dark hair, green eyes. Seen anyone matching that description?" There was a pause, during which Zara could almost feel Caldwell's consideration. She waited for the betrayal, for him to call out that yes, she was right here. "Can't say that I have," Caldwell replied evenly. "Though we've got the Dixon wagon train stopped here for repairs. Might ask them if they've seen anyone." "Already checked with them before they left Silver Ridge," the sheriff said. "Dixon said they hadn't taken on any single women." Another pause. "Sorry I can't be of more help, Sheriff. If I see anyone matching that description, I'll be sure to let you know." The conversation shifted to general matters: cattle prices, water rights, local politics before the sheriff finally departed. Zara remained hidden until the hoofbeats faded into the distance, then slumped against the wall, weak with relief. She didn't notice Caldwell approaching until his shadow fell across her. "He's gone," Caldwell said quietly. "You lied for me," Zara whispered, looking up at him with wide eyes. "Why?" Caldwell's expression was serious, his jaw set in determination. "I don't need to meet this Garrett to know what kind of man he is. No decent husband sends lawmen hunting his wife like she's property." "He won't stop looking," she said, voicing her deepest fear. "He'll never let me go. Then we'll need to make sure you're legally free of him." Caldwell offered his hand to help her up. "The circuit judge comes through Santa Fe next month. With evidence of abuse, he could grant a divorce." "Evidence?" Zara shook her head. "It would be my word against his." "Mrs. Peterson saw the scars on your back when you were washing at the river," Caldwell said gently. "She told me yesterday, concerned for your welfare. Those marks tell their own story." Shame and relief warred within Zara. The scars from Thaddeus's belt were her most carefully guarded secret, visible proof of his cruelty that she had hidden from the world. "I could testify," Caldwell continued, "as could Mrs. Peterson. In the meantime, you can stay here, where you'll be safe." "Why would you do this for me?" Zara asked, genuinely bewildered by his generosity. Caldwell's weather-lined face softened. "Because everyone deserves a chance to live without fear. And because," he stopped, seeming to reconsider his words, "because it's the right thing to do." That night, alone in her room, Zara found herself unable to sleep. The possibility of legal freedom from Thaddeus was both tantalizing and terrifying. What kind of life could she build for herself? What kind of woman could she become if she weren't living in fear? And beneath these questions lay another, more unsettling one. What were her feelings for Zachary Caldwell? She had known him barely 3 days, yet there was a connection between them that felt as old as the mountains surrounding them. She recognized the danger in such feelings. Hadn't she thought Thaddeus was her salvation once? But something about Caldwell felt fundamentally different. The next morning brought more clarity. Dixon announced that the wagon repairs were nearly complete, and they would be departing the following day to rejoin the rest of the train, which had continued on to Santa Fe at a slow pace to allow them to catch up. "Mrs. Peterson tells me you may not be continuing with us," Dixon said to Zara as they discussed the departure plans. Zara glanced at Caldwell, who stood nearby, his face carefully neutral. I haven't decided yet." Dixon nodded understandingly. "You have until morning. We leave at first light." Throughout the day, Zara found herself torn between two paths, continuing to California as she'd planned, or staying at Circle C until the judge arrived. Both options carried risks. On the wagon train, she would be moving, harder for Thaddeus to track, but vulnerable on the trail. At the ranch, she would be stationary but protected by Caldwell's presence and authority. As evening approached, Zara sought out Caldwell, finding him in the small study off the main living area. He was seated at a desk, ledgers open before him, but his pen was idle in his hand as he gazed out the window at the mountains. "Mr. Caldwell," she said softly from the doorway. He turned, his expression brightening at the sight of her. "Zara, please, come in." She entered, closing the door behind her for privacy. "I need your honest opinion." "You'll always have that from me," he replied, setting aside his pen. "Should I continue to California with the wagon train, or stay here until the judge comes?" Caldwell leaned back in his chair, considering her question seriously. "I can't make that decision for you. Both paths have merits. But what would you do in my position?" He met her gaze directly. "I would stay, not just because it's safer, but because running without resolving what's behind you means you're never truly free. Get the divorce. Make a clean break. Then decide your future without looking over your shoulder." Zara nodded slowly, recognizing the wisdom in his words. "And, would I be welcome here? Truly? I wouldn't want to impose. You could never be an imposition," he interrupted, rising from his chair. "This house has been too quiet for too long. Your presence here, it brings life back to these rooms." The simple honesty of his statement touched something deep within her. "Then I'll stay until the judge comes." Relief and something more complex passed across Caldwell's face. "I'm glad." The next morning, Zara bid farewell to the Peterson family and the others from the wagon train. Mrs. Peterson embraced her warmly, promising to speak to the judge if needed when they reached Santa Fe. "You found a good man there," the older woman whispered, nodding toward Caldwell, who stood speaking with Dixon. "Not all of them are monsters. Thank the Lord." As the wagons pulled away, Zara felt a curious mixture of apprehension and hope. For the first time since fleeing Thaddeus, she wasn't running, she was standing her ground, preparing to fight for her freedom. Life at Circle C quickly fell into a comfortable rhythm. Zara assisted Rosa with household duties, insisting on earning her keep despite Caldwell's assurances that it wasn't necessary. She found unexpected joy in creating order and beauty in the spacious but somewhat Spartan home, adding wildflowers to the dinner table, rearranging furniture to better capture the light, mending linens that had gone too long without a woman's attention. Caldwell, for his part, maintained a respectful distance while finding small ways to include her in ranch life. He brought her interesting books from his collection, invited her opinion on business matters, and gradually introduced her to his world of cattle, horses, and the endless work of maintaining a successful ranch. In the evenings, they would often sit on the porch, watching the sunset that had so captivated Caldwell's mother years before. Their conversations ranged widely from literature to politics, from childhood memories to dreams for the future. Zara found herself laughing more than she had in years, discovering parts of herself that Thaddeus's cruelty had buried deep. 2 weeks after the wagon train's departure, disaster nearly struck. Zara was in the kitchen garden, harvesting vegetables for dinner, when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Looking up, she saw a group of riders coming down the main road toward the ranch, and at their head, unmistakable even at a distance, was Thaddeus. Terror froze her in place for a critical moment before self-preservation took over. She dropped her basket and ran for the house, bursting through the kitchen door. "Rosa," she gasped. "My husband, former husband, he's coming." The housekeeper's eyes widened. "Mr. Caldwell is in town. Quick, upstairs." Rosa hustled Zara to a small room at the back of the house, a storage space hidden behind a panel in the master bedroom. "Stay here," the woman ordered. "No matter what you hear, Zara huddled in the darkness as Rosa closed the panel, leaving only a thin crack through which a sliver of light penetrated. Minutes later, she heard voices downstairs, Thaddeus's demanding tone, another man's rougher drawl, and Rosa's calm, measured responses. "Search the house if you must," she heard Rosa say. "But as I told you, there is no woman here except myself." Heavy footsteps moved through the house, coming closer, then entering the master bedroom. Zara held her breath, pressing herself into the farthest corner of the small space. A floorboard creaked just outside her hiding place. "What's behind this panel?" a man's voice asked, not Thaddeus, but one of his companions. "Storage for winter blankets," Rosa replied evenly. "Nothing of value." There was a moment of silence, then the sound of retreating footsteps. Zara remained frozen, barely allowing herself to breathe until long after the house had fallen quiet. It was nearly an hour before Rosa returned to release her. "They are gone," the housekeeper said, helping Zara from the cramped space. "But they will be back. They are staying in town." "I need to leave," Zara said shakily. "If Thaddeus finds me here, he'll hurt anyone who try to help me." Rosa's expression was fierce. "Mr. Caldwell can handle men like your husband. Wait for him to return before you decide anything." Caldwell returned just before sunset, his expression thunderous as Rosa explained what had happened. He came immediately to Zara, who sat pale and trembling in the parlor. "Are you all right?" he asked, kneeling before her chair. She nodded, though they both knew it wasn't true. "Thaddeus is in town. He'll come back, probably with the sheriff next time." "Let him come," Caldwell said grimly. "I've already sent a rider to Santa Fe with a message for Judge Parker. He's a fair man who takes a dim view of abusive husbands. With luck, he'll expedite his visit. And until then, you stay here, where I can protect you." Caldwell's voice softened. "I won't let him hurt you again, Zara. I promise you that." The sincerity in his eyes made her throat tighten with emotion. "I believe you," she whispered, realizing as she said it that it was true. Somehow, in these few short weeks, Zachary Caldwell had earned a trust she'd thought she would never give a man again. That night, Caldwell doubled the watch around the ranch and moved Zara to a different bedroom, one with easy access to both the stairs and the back exit. "Just in case," he explained, though his expression made it clear he hoped such precautions would prove unnecessary. For 3 days, they lived in a state of tense vigilance. Caldwell rarely left the ranch, and when he did, he ensured that at least 2 trusted ranch hands remained behind with Zara. She felt both grateful for his protection and guilty for the disruption her presence caused to the ranch's normal operations. On the 4th day, a rider arrived from Santa Fe bearing a letter from Judge Parker. Caldwell read it quickly, his face brightening. "The judge is coming within the week," he told Zara. "He's heard rumors of Garrett's behavior before and is taking your situation seriously." Relief washed over her. "Then it's almost over?" "Almost," Caldwell agreed, though his expression remained cautious. "But Thaddeus will get desperate when he learns the judge is coming. We need to be even more careful now." His prediction proved accurate. The next morning, Thaddeus arrived at the ranch with Sheriff Harlan beside him and 3 rough-looking men at his back. Caldwell met them in the yard, his ranch hands strategically positioned nearby, all armed. Zara watched from an upstairs window, her heart pounding as she saw her husband for the first time since her escape. He looked thinner, his face flushed with anger or drink, perhaps both. "Caldwell," Thaddeus called, his voice carrying clearly through the morning air. "I know you're harboring my wife. The law's on my side here." Caldwell stood his ground, steady as the mountains behind him. "Your wife isn't here, Garrett. And if she were, the law protects women from abusive husbands." "You calling me a wife beater?" Thaddeus snarled, his hand moving toward his gun. "I'm calling you a man with a reputation," Caldwell replied evenly. "One that Judge Parker is quite interested in hearing more about when he arrives from Santa Fe next week." Thaddeus's face contorted with rage. "You've got no right to interfere between a man and his wife. Every decent man has a duty to protect those who can't protect themselves," Caldwell countered. "Now, I suggest you leave my property before this gets ugly." Sheriff Harlan, looking increasingly uncomfortable, placed a restraining hand on Thaddeus's arm. "Come on, Garrett. We'll handle this properly, through the courts." For a moment, Zara thought Thaddeus might draw his weapon despite the sheriff's presence. But after a tense standoff, he spat on the ground and turned his horse. "This isn't over, Caldwell," he called over his shoulder. "Not by a long shot." As the men rode away, Zara sagged against the window frame, both relieved and terrified. Thaddeus's threat hung in the air like the promise of a storm. He wasn't a man who made idle threats. He would return, perhaps under cover of darkness, perhaps with more men. Caldwell found her still at the window minutes later, her face pale with worry. "He won't stop," she whispered as he entered the room. "Not until he's dead, or I am. Or until the law takes his power away," Caldwell countered, though his expression was grim. "Judge Parker will be here in 5 days. We just need to hold out until then." That night, Caldwell himself stood watch on the porch, rifle across his knees, while his most trusted hands patrolled the property. Zara brought him coffee late in the evening, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the autumn chill. "You should be sleeping," he said as she joined him, though his eyes showed appreciation for her company. "I couldn't," she admitted, sitting beside him on the porch swing. "Every time I close my eyes, I see his face." Caldwell's expression darkened. "He can't hurt you here." "It's not me I'm worried about now," Zara said softly. "You've put yourself in danger for me. All of you have. By choice," he reminded her. "And it's a choice I'd make again without hesitation." In the soft glow of the porch lantern, his face was all planes and shadows, handsome in its weathered strength. Zara found herself studying the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his mouth curved when he spoke, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "Why?" she asked, the question that had been hovering between them for weeks finally finding voice. "Why go to such lengths for a woman you barely know?" Caldwell was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the distant hills rather than on her face. "Because from the moment you knelt on my dining room floor, gathering broken plates with bloody fingers and tears in your eyes, I recognized something in you that called to something in me." He turned to her then, his gaze direct and unflinching. "Courage. The kind that keeps going when it would be easier to give up. The kind my mother had when she followed my father into this wilderness. The kind I've tried to live by every day since they were taken from me." His words washed over her like warm rain, seeping into places long dry and barren. "I don't feel courageous," she whispered. "Most days I feel terrified." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," he said gently. "It's moving forward despite it." Impulsively, Zara reached out and took his hand, her smaller one nearly disappearing in his calloused palm. He looked startled for a moment, then his fingers closed carefully around hers. "Whatever happens," she said, her voice stronger than she expected, "I want you to know that these weeks here have given me back something I thought was lost forever. Hope. And for that, I'll always be grateful." Caldwell's eyes held hers, something profound and unspoken passing between them in the quiet night. Neither of them heard the soft footsteps approaching from the shadows at the side of the house. The explosion of gunfire shattered the moment. Caldwell reacted instantly, shoving Zara to the floor of the porch as bullets splintered the wood around them. He returned fire, his shots measured and deliberate despite the chaos. Shouts erupted across the property as ranch hands responded to the attack. Zara cowered against the porch railing, her ears ringing from the gunfire. Through the haze of fear, she saw Caldwell rise to one knee, still firing, his face set in grim determination. "Get inside," he ordered, never taking his eyes from the darkness where their attackers lurked. Zara scrambled for the door, reaching it just as another volley of shots rang out. She turned back in time to see Caldwell jerk backward, his shoulder blooming red as a bullet found its mark. "Zach," she cried, the shortened version of his name coming naturally in her panic. Despite his wound, Caldwell maintained his position, firing steadily as his men converged on the house. "Go," he shouted at her. "The cellar." Heart pounding, Zara raced through the house to the kitchen, where Rosa was already holding open the trap door to the root cellar. The two women descended into darkness as the gunfight continued above them. For what seemed like hours, but was probably only minutes, they huddled in the damp cellar, listening to the muffled sounds of combat. Gradually, the shooting diminished, then stopped entirely. Footsteps moved across the floor above them. "Mrs. Caldwell?" "Rosa?" A voice called one of the ranch hands, not Thaddeus. Rosa moved toward the ladder. Is it safe, Miguel? Yes, madam. We got him all. The trap door opened, light flooding into their hiding place. Zara climbed out to find the kitchen filled with armed ranch hands. Through the window, she could see several bodies laid out in the yard. Thaddeus's men, though not Thaddeus himself. Where's Mr. Caldwell? She asked urgently. Doc's seeing to him in the parlor, Miguel answered. He took a bullet, but he's tough. Zara ran to the parlor, her heart in her throat. Caldwell sat in his armchair, shirt off, while the local doctor, who must have been at the ranch by chance or summons, bandaged his shoulder. It's a clean wound, the doctor was saying as she entered. Missed anything vital. You'll be sore for a few weeks, but no lasting damage. Caldwell looked up as Zara approached, relief washing over his face. You're all right. I'm not the one who was shot, she replied, kneeling beside his chair. Where's Thaddeus? A grim smile touched Caldwell's lips. Your husband won't be troubling anyone again. Sheriff Harland arrived just after the shooting started. Seems Garrett's men got nervous waiting and started drinking, then talked too much in the saloon. Harland heard their plans and rode out to warn us. And Thaddeus? Zara pressed. Dead, Caldwell said simply. He drew on the sheriff when Harland tried to arrest him. The news hit Zara like a physical blow, not grief, but a sudden, overwhelming sense of freedom so intense it left her dizzy. Thaddeus was gone. The threat that had shadowed her for months had vanished in a single moment. It's over, she whispered, tears beginning to flow. It's really over. Caldwell reached out with his good arm, drawing her against his uninjured side. It's over, he confirmed softly. You're free now. The days that followed passed in a blur of activity. The sheriff took statements from everyone at the ranch, officially ruling the deaths of Thaddeus's men as self-defense. Judge Parker arrived as promised, and though Zara no longer needed a divorce, he took the time to document her case and ensure that her marriage was legally dissolved with Thaddeus's death. Property rights revert to you as his widow, the judge informed her. Though from what I've learned, there's precious little left. Garrett gambled away most of his inheritance over the past year. Zara nodded, unsurprised. Thaddeus had always been reckless with money. I don't want anything that was his, she said firmly. I just want to move forward. As Caldwell recovered from his wound, Zara found herself at a crossroads. With her freedom secured and her safety no longer in question, the future stretched before her, full of possibilities but also uncertainties. California still beckoned, offering a complete fresh start away from the memories of New Mexico. Yet the thought of leaving Circle C, leaving Caldwell, created an ache in her chest that grew stronger with each passing day. One evening, about 2 weeks after the shootout, Zara found Caldwell in the garden behind the house, arms still in a sling but otherwise recovering well. He was watching the sunset, his face thoughtful in the golden light. Your mother was right about the sunsets here, Zara said as she joined him. They are different from anywhere else. Caldwell turned to her with a smile. Some things are worth traveling a long distance to discover. The double meaning in his words wasn't lost on her. They stood in companionable silence for a moment before Zara gathered her courage. I've been thinking about what to do next, she began hesitantly. Where to go? And have you decided? His voice was carefully neutral, though something flickered in his eyes. Zara took a deep breath. That depends. On what? On whether there might be reasons to stay. She looked up at him, vulnerability and hope mingling in her expression. Good reasons. Caldwell turned to face her fully, his gray eyes intense in the fading light. I can think of many reasons why you should stay, Zara. Selfish reasons, mostly. Tell me one, she whispered. He reached out with his good hand, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. Because in the short time you've been here, this house has become a home again. Because the thought of you leaving makes the future seem emptier. Because I find myself thinking of you first thing each morning and last thing each night. Zara's heart quickened at his words, at the tenderness in his touch. Those are good reasons, she admitted softly. But not enough, he acknowledged, a shadow crossing his face. I know it's too soon. After what you've been through, the last thing you need is another man making claims on your life. You're nothing like Thaddeus, Zara said firmly. Nothing at all. Even so, Caldwell dropped his hand, stepping back slightly. You deserve time to find yourself, to heal completely. If California is where that healing lies, I would never stand in your way. The space between them felt both vast and intimate, charged with unspoken possibilities. Zara studied his face, the strength there, yes, but also the kindness, the patience, the deep well of understanding that had been her sanctuary these past weeks. What if, she said carefully, my healing isn't about a place, but about feeling safe enough to build something new, something better? Hope flickered in Caldwell's eyes. Then I would say you should build it wherever your heart leads you. And if it leads me here, Zara took a step closer, closing the distance between them. If it leads me to you. The last rays of sunset caught in his eyes, turning them to molten silver as he looked down at her. Then I would consider myself the most fortunate man in the territory. With gentle deliberation, Zara reached up and laid her palm against his cheek, feeling the warmth of his skin, the slight roughness of evening stubble. I don't want to run anymore, she whispered. I want to stay here, with you. Caldwell covered her hand with his own, turning his face to press a kiss against her palm. Are you certain? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. I don't want you to feel obligated because of what's happened. I've never been more certain of anything, Zara assured him. You showed me what it means to be treated with respect, with kindness. You gave me safety when I needed it most, but more than that, you gave me the courage to believe in possibilities again. Slowly, giving her every chance to draw back, Caldwell bent toward her. Zara rose on tiptoe to meet him, their lips coming together in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. His arms circled her waist, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened, tender yet fervent with promises of all that might lie ahead. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Caldwell rested his forehead against hers, his expression one of wonder and joy. I think I've been waiting for you my whole life, he confessed quietly, even when I didn't know it. Then we've both found what we were looking for, Zara replied, her heart fuller than she'd ever thought possible, even if we took different paths to get here. As spring blossomed across the New Mexico territory, Circle C Ranch witnessed another kind of blossoming. Zachary Caldwell and Zara Everett were married in a simple ceremony on the front porch where they'd first connected. Judge Parker performed the service, with Rosa, the ranch hands, and a few trusted neighbors in attendance. Zara wore a dress of pale blue silk that Caldwell had ordered special from Santa Fe, her dark hair adorned with wildflowers gathered that morning. As they exchanged vows, with the mountains bearing witness and the spring breeze carrying the scent of sage and new beginnings, Zara felt the final shadows of her past lift away. I promise to honor your strength, respect your independence, and cherish your trust for all our days, Caldwell vowed, his voice steady and true as he placed a simple gold band on her finger. When it was her turn, Zara's voice trembled slightly but held firm. I promise to face each day by your side, to build our home with love and courage, and to never forget that even broken things can be made beautiful again. Their first months of marriage brought adjustments and discoveries. Zara learned the rhythms of ranch life, finding satisfaction in work that connected her to the land and the changing seasons. Caldwell discovered the joy of partnership after years of solitary responsibility, his natural reserve softening in the warmth of their shared life. Together, they expanded the main house, adding rooms that might someday be filled with children's laughter. They planted an orchard that would take years to mature, a testament to their belief in a future worth investing in. And each evening, they watched the sunset from the porch, marveling at the way no two were ever exactly alike, yet each was perfect in its own way. On their first anniversary, Caldwell presented Zara with a cabinet he'd crafted himself from pine and cherry wood. Inside, displayed on velvet, were the broken pieces of the china plates she'd dropped that fateful night. Why did you keep these? She asked, puzzled and touched by the unexpected gift. Caldwell wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder as they both gazed at the fragments. Because they marked the moment everything changed, the moment you began to believe you deserved better. Zara turned in his embrace to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. You were right, you know, that night, when you told me I wasn't cleaning hurt anymore. I meant every word, he said softly, brushing her cheek with his thumb. And I've thanked God every day since that you believed me. 3 years after their wedding, as summer painted the hills with wildflowers, Zara gave birth to twins, a boy they named Thomas after Caldwell's father, and a girl called Eleanor for Zara's mother. Rosa, now more grandmother than housekeeper to the growing family, declared them the most beautiful babies ever born in New Mexico territory. As Zara nursed their daughter one evening, watching Caldwell rock their son to sleep by the fire, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From terror to safety, from broken to whole, from alone to beloved, each step had been necessary to create the life she now cherished. "What are you thinking about?" Caldwell asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "About broken plates," she replied with a smile. "And how sometimes what seems like disaster can actually be the beginning of something beautiful." Caldwell's eyes, still the color of summer storms, but now perpetually warmed by love, met hers across the room. "I'll remember that the next time the children break something," he teased gently. "See that you do," Zara laughed. "The sound is free and clear as the mountain air. Some messes are worth making, after all." Outside, the sun sank behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, a New Mexico sunset, uniquely beautiful, marking the end of one day and the promise of another to come. Inside, surrounded by the family they had built together, Zara and Zachary Caldwell continued writing their story, one day at a time, in a home where broken things were remembered but never regretted, and where love had the final word.